Tonight, we're teaming up with all the other late-night shows to talk about climate change.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Climate change is here, and it's bad, y'all.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be a really fun night.
Billy Joel's going to have to write an update for 2021 and call it Actually We Did Start the Fire.
Of course, it's not all bad news. There's also terrible news.
Burning hotter, faster, and more explosive than ever before.
Almost the entire city of Oroville is under a voluntary
Many human-caused effects are now irreversible.
Wildfires raging across Greece and Turkey, forcing thousands to flee their homes.
Chaos along the Jersey Shore.
Catastrophic flooding in Germany and Belgium.
120 people have died and hundreds more are still missing.
Beijing woke up with pollution surging to hazardous levels as a sandstorm swept across China's capital.
The number of deaths from indoor air pollution is even higher than that from all other kinds of pollutants combined. The vast majority of deaths are in Southeast Asia and Africa.
You can't escape. It's basically an intervention. Our future is in jeopardy.
Thing is abundantly clear. Air pollution is one of the biggest environmental threats to human health. Every year, exposure to air pollution, both indoors and outdoors, is estimated to cause 7 million premature deaths and result in the loss of millions more healthy years of life. That puts air pollution on par with other major global health risks, such as unhealthy diets and tobacco use. Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Williams, Dean of the Faculty here at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to another installment of When Public Health Means Business, Clearing the Air, Why Now is the Time to Tackle Air Pollution, a program that is presented with the World Health Organization. We are just a few weeks away from COP26, and many are saying that this is our last best chance to tackle this global threat. For our part, we hope that this conversation is one of many asking the hard questions in search of a sustainable path forward. I want to now turn over to our presenting partner, WHO's Dr. Maria Nera, Director of Public Health, Environment, and Social Determinants of Health. Maria, over to you.
Many thanks, Dean Williams. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to discuss with you how to clear the air. And I think we have now in front of very important political opportunities. In few weeks from now, we will go to the COP26. Everybody says that this COP has to be very special in terms of the commitments and the actions that will be taken. And for this reason, WHO presented yesterday, together with 45 million of health professionals seconding our report and co-signing with us our report, the health argument for climate action. What we are saying in this report is that, of course, climate change is already affecting us and we need to adapt and we need to invest on the adaptation process and making our health systems more resilient. But there are good news as well. If you tackle the causes of air pollution, you will generate enormous, fantastic health gains. And most of those health gains will come from the reduction of air pollution and therefore the reduction on the number of deaths that are occurring every year. And you know that number is dramatic, and unfortunately we need to repeat it very often these days. 7 million premature deaths caused by exposure to air pollution. WHO recently launched the new air quality guidelines. As you well know, we are now more restrictive. We are lowering the levels of exposure because this is the only way to protect human health. But the good news again is that if we are able globally to implement the recommended levels particularly for PM 2.5, we could save 80% of those lives that are now destroyed because of air pollution. So we could save more than 5.6 million deaths if we were able to convince countries, governments to implement those recommendations included in our air quality guidelines. These are times now for ambition and for speed in the name of public health. We are really hoping that COP26 will show the good opportunity for protecting health and making sure that the Paris Treaty becomes a public health treaty, and a good opportunity to implement, to go as far as possible, and the level of ambition should be very high in terms of implementing the air quality recommendation. For that, we need the participation of everyone, from the private to the public sector, academicians, research institutions, big universities, individuals, UN, governments. Everyone needs to participate, and civil society, and of course, the young people that is already demonstrating in the street. Over to us to prove that we are able to take advantage of those incredible political opportunities. Thank you very much.
Turn our program over to Stephanie Elam. Stephanie, over to you.
Dean Williams, thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you to Dr. Nera as well for that information she just shared with us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we are going to have here today as part of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health ongoing series, When Public Health Means Business. And one of the really large issues that we are going to talk about today that I don't think most people realize just how deadly air pollution can be is what we're going to get into. And we know that climate change is something that we need to get everyday people invested in overall. And you can see that just recently, some 200 health and medical journals called climate change, quote, the greatest threat to global public health. Take a look at what we've just been seeing around the world, from the floods, the typhoons. You've got monster storms hitting the east coast of the United States. You also have drought and wildfires, two things I'm very familiar with living in Los Angeles and spending so much time out in wildfire and the toxic air that you're breathing when you're out there. But imagine this everywhere and not taking into account that this isn't because of a threat like this, but this is just because you're living your everyday life. And that's what we're going to get into in this conversation. It's silent, but it's a deadly killer, air pollution is. And when you look at that fact that we just heard Dean Williams say, we also heard Dr. Nera say it as well, an estimated 7 million people every year around the globe losing their lives because of air pollution. This is something that needs to be addressed now, and that's what we are going to do, especially since, according to data from WHO, 9 out of 10 people breathe air that is not considered safe, and people in low and middle income countries, they suffer the highest exposures there. And then a new study out of Harvard Chan School saying that the exposure to even low concentrations of air pollution may be causing tens of thousands of deaths a year. Of course, when you look at the vulnerable populations, so many of those people are the elderly and other vulnerable groups, at least when you look here in the United States. So I know people tend to think of air pollutants and they think of smog, they think of outside the home, but we're also going to take a look at household air pollutants and what is there. But it is a major threat, and that is why we are taking the time to talk about it today. Let me introduce to you our panelists who will help us clear this subject up and realize why we need to get more people invested in learning about this and making changes. First off, Donnie Alexander for being here. We also have Senator Ed Markey. He is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Clean Energy, Climate, and Nuclear Safety. Senator Markey, thank you for being here as well. Mark Watts is the executive director of C40 Cities. And we also have Dr. Ari Bernstein, the interim director of Sea Change. And Ebony Twilley Martin, co-executive director of Greenpeace USA, is here as well. Heather Adair Rouhani is the technical officer for World Health Organization, and Michael Greenstone, an economist, Energy Policy Institute from the University of Chicago. We really have a very global panel here, people from all over the world who are here for this conversation, so we can get into it. Dr. Bernstein, I want to start with you because I want to go ahead and define what we're talking about when we are talking about this pollutant. Let's talk about outside. What makes up outside air pollution?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephanie, and it's a real honor to be a part of this session with such a wonderful group. Air pollution has different forms, as you alluded to. Outdoor air pollution the form that we worry most about is called particulate matter, and that really refers to anything suspended in the air. We measure it by size. We do a lot of research on particulate matter that's 2.5 microns inside. That's about 1/20th the width of a human hair. And for most people in the world, that particulate matter comes from very few sources. And for most folks, the overwhelming source is burning fossil fuels for transportation, producing goods, and producing electricity. Particulate matter is particularly harmful to our hearts and lungs. It's responsible for about 20% of the neonatal mortality in the world in young children. And the more we study it, the more we realize that it really just harms every part of our body. Critically, what we learned and what was so clearly articulated before about the burdens of air pollution, particularly particulates, shows us how much we stand to gain when we stop burning fossil fuels. And importantly, because pollution and poverty are bedfellows, when we reduce air pollution, particularly fossil fuel-based air pollution, we stand to have gains for health equity in ways that are very difficult to achieve otherwise. So there's really a tremendous opportunity to promote health equity through addressing air pollution.
And you're talking about this air pollution and how it affects everyday life. Part of everyday life is what you do inside the home, and that household air pollution that we probably, most of us, don't even take into consideration every day. Donnie, can you go ahead and explain to us why we need to care about the air within our homes?
Yeah, Stephanie, thank you. When we talk about household air pollution, in the simplest terms, it is really the burning of these polluting fuels, the combustion of these polluting fuels in homes. And I think most of us think about turning a knob or flipping a switch when we go to cook. But in many homes, about 2.6 billion, or a third of the world's population, that is a far more arduous task. That includes going out and collecting wood fuel. Maybe you spend 10 or 20 hours a week collecting wood fuel. You bring that into the home and you burn it. You light a fire. So think about going camping with your child and you're cooking, marshmallows or roasting marshmallows. Well, bring that campfire inside in a poorly ventilated kitchen. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about household air pollution. It is pervasive and it is toxic. I want to give just a little bit of an comparison. In 2020, California's wildfires were one of the worst in the history. In September of 2020, we saw particulate matter levels of around 120 micrograms per cubic meter in Yosemite, 24 times higher than what WHO says is protective for health. When you go inside a home, those concentrations are often at 750, 800 micrograms per cubic meter, 150 times higher than what WHO says is protective for health. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about household air pollution. And that affects, like I said, about a third of the world's population.
And you're talking about burning wood, but what are the other types of solid fuel? Just because I have you here, because I think people don't realize that we're also talking about coal. What else are we talking about with these solid fuels?
Yeah, we're talking about coal. Yeah, we're talking about coal. We're talking about charcoal, which has major impacts on the climate to produce. We're talking about this is, and kerosene. Kerosene should not be forgotten either because it has a lot of other particles attached to it. So it isn't just firewood, absolutely not, but it is a lot of polluting fuels burned in inefficient technologies, stove technologies. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about this.
Okay, and so you're talking about people just going through their everyday lives to do what they need to do for light, for heating, whatever they need to do in their homes. And Michael, I want to bring you in here to talk about what you and your colleagues have done at the University of Chicago with the breakdown what that is and what this index tells you.
Yeah, so we created the Air Quality Life Index based on some research I had done on what the impacts of particulates air pollution are on life expectancy. And part of the reason that we did that is, I think, like a dissatisfaction with the standard ways that people talk about air pollution. The standard ways, the AQI, the Air Quality Index. And personally, I can't remember if orange is worse than brown, is better than red or maroon. And we just felt like that wasn't connecting with people as to what are the damages or the harms that they're facing from air pollution. And so what the Air Quality Life Index does is it converts air pollution concentrations into the loss of life expectancy, or put a different way, the gain in life expectancy that one could achieve by moving from the current levels to, say, the WHO standard or a country's own standard. And what came out of that is that the average person on the planet is living about 2.2 years less than if the entire planet complied with the WHO standard. And, you know, some of these numbers are a little mind-numbing, they're so big, but, you know, let's just stop and imagine that. Suppose there were Martians who came to the world and to the Earth, and we're taking away 2.2 years of life from the average person. Like, it would be totally unacceptable. And because air pollution is quiet, and I think someone earlier said silent, we seemingly have kind of fallen into this trap of accepting it in too many places in the world. And so what the Air Quality Life Index does is really try to provide a very sharp metric of the benefits of regulations that would reduce air pollution. And I think that's important because air pollution is not like a fact of life. It's something that we choose to have. And to the degree that we have policy that reduces air pollution, we can extend people's lives. And the United States has a very long history of being quite successful at that. Interestingly, China declared a war on air pollution in 2013 that was has been remarkably successful so far at reducing air pollution. And the Air Quality Life Index can be used to quantitatively say, well, here's the benefits of doing that.
And by looking at your index, right, you can see that of the things that can threaten people that are, this is the worst one. Am I correct by?
Yeah, so someone said earlier that the climate change is the greatest, I wrote this down, greatest threat to global public health. I'm going to try and say something slightly controversial, say I disagree. But I'm going to add a word. I'm going to say the greatest current threat to global public health is air pollution. And it is more years of life are lost to that than to alcohol and drugs, even more than to cigarette smoking, more to violence, more than to terrorism. It's astonishing. And this is something that is a choice. We are choosing to have policy that allows around the world different levels of air pollution. And the consequence is, I think, because the costs are not so clear, and that's what the Air Quality Life Index is trying to solve, we have chosen to allow these Martians arrive on the planet and rob the average person of 2.2 years.
Okay, so that puts into perspective, there's a couple of things that Michael said that I want to go back and touch on. The first one, though, I'm going to bring it to you, Heather, because I want to talk about these new set of global air quality guidelines, the first ones that have come out since 2005 from WHO. Can you just break those down and tell us how this could help change lives based on this index, what we can do and see to change lives and have people living longer because they have better air quality?
Thanks. No, so these new guidelines, they're exciting. Indeed, this is the first time they've been updated since 2005. And basically the overall message is we actually have to have cleaner air than we initially thought. The guideline levels are a bit lower than what was initially expected for the particulate matter, for nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, et cetera, just showing that we need to take action much faster than what we're doing, and that we need to be doing more action than what has been done before. And so these guidelines also provide some interim targets still to help countries progress, because it's not as simple as just changing one thing from one day to the next. It really requires a whole massive change in infrastructure, the way that our behavior as individuals, the way our policies are put into place, how we move around, how we consume goods and things, we produce power. These are all things. It's a very integrated approach that really requires everyone to take a part, including the health sector, the energy sector, the transport sector. We all have a role to play. And these guidelines also offer something that we didn't have before in the previous guidelines, and that's good practice statements on some other particulate matter. In particular, black carbon, which is actually one of the largest sources of climate change that we're seeing, the climate warming right now. It's one of the greatest climate warming pollutants. And then we also have a good practice statement on ultrafine particles. So, Dr. Brinstein mentioned about the fine particulate matter, which is less than 2.5 micrograms per meter cubed. But now we're seeing actually more epidemiological evidence showing there's a really much smaller ultrafine particles that really penetrate deep into the body and impact the body systemically, even more than the fine particulate matter, which also goes in. We're finding things, for example, toxins in pregnant women and their fetuses and things because of these super ultrafine getting really deep down. So we have some good practice statements in those in the guidelines. We also have a very important statement regarding sand and dust storms. And this is a real challenge because this is a lot of a natural phenomena, particularly in North Africa, Western Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean region. So we have some guidance on what people can do to help protect themselves when in these cases where you have a lot of sand and dust, which hasn't been provided or an earlier guideline. And it really just highlights the fact that we really all need to be working together and we all have a role to play. And they really help guide countries in setting these targets to really protect the health that we need. And along these lines, achieving these guidelines is going to help us from climate change. So really the addressing the air pollution is really one of the best ways to help with climate change mitigation and adapting to climate change for the population. It's by really tackling air pollution. If we want to beat climate change, we got to beat air pollution first.
So here's the thing, you all so far have laid out what the issue is. There's data to support that this is a problem, that it needs to be addressed, and that it needs to be more urgent. So this brings me to you, Senator Markey, because we're just a couple of weeks out from COP26. We hear pundits, people who spend their lives delving into these facts, talking about how the time to ring the bell on this was in the past. This is a thing that needs to be addressed now. Is it too late, do you think, to make global policy change, Senator, or can really something happen coming out of this next meeting?
Well, it's not too late and it can't be too late. I mean, we've already got a lot of the problems, a lot of the harm built into the system because we have not acted in the past with the level of urgency which we should have. But we have another chance, and that chance is coming up right now in Glasgow as the world comes together. The Senate and the House, obviously, and the Congress have to come together to put together a package which is something that the United States with credibility can put on the table. You can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't ask the rest of the world to do stuff that the United States is not doing. And we have to do it because we know that the burden of air pollution doesn't fall equally on every one of us. Women and children in low and middle income countries are particularly at risk. However, I don't think high income countries like the United States should have an attitude of not my problem when it comes to climate change, because about 40% of excess CO2 in our atmosphere is red, white, and blue. It's 200 years of industrialization by the United States. So we have a responsibility to then deal with what has happened because of that. And the WHO report laid out that soot and methane emitted by inefficient stoves are powerful accelerants of climate change. And this is our problem. The United States has a responsibility to protect the planet and people's lives. And the main reason for the widespread use of inefficient stoves and kerosene lamps is a whopping 1 billion people who still lack access to electricity. And we need to move and have a clean energy revolution: wind, solar, plug-in hybrids, all electric vehicles, battery storage technologies. And it has to be led by the United States so that we can lower the cost of these technologies and then urge U.S. International development agencies, other international financing institutions to support those clean energy investments in developing countries around the world. Otherwise, it just won't work to make health and climate and economic sense for those countries. So we have to be the leaders.
Senator Markey,
the funding. Yes.
I'm going to jump in here because you're saying a couple of things that I want to bring Ebony in on this conversation, because as a executive director for Greenpeace, what you must see around the world as far as who is really being impacted. You heard the senator speak to this. You also heard Heather was saying this, Michael was saying this. Who is really bearing the brunt of what we're seeing? Yeah, red, white, and blue may be responsible for a great part of it, but we don't really deal with who is really feeling it because of this air pollution problem.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Stephanie. Moreover, we see Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, poor communities that are bearing the brunt of this burden. Although we say global pollution might be the biggest current threat, fossil fuels are the driver of climate change and the driver of that threat now. And if we look at the health conditions of our Black and Brown communities, they're more disproportionately impacted by respiratory diseases, health disease, birth defects, asthma. And as a mother of an asthmatic child, that brought that right home for me. Black people are 40 times more likely to have asthma and 3 times more likely to die from asthma. So as Senator Markey said, if we are going to do what health demands, what science demands, and what justice demands at this moment, we have to reverse historical injustices. And we have to phase out fossil fuels to make sure that we are lifting the burden off of those frontline communities that are impacted. They are the ones that are experiencing these 100-year floods every 5 years now. They are the ones that are experiencing the wildfires. They are the ones that are experiencing the drought now. So if we are serious about the science and the justice of what the demand is right now, the number one thing is to phase out fossil fuels and move to a just transition.
Yeah, and Mark, to that point, I'm looking at some of the research I was doing to prepare for this conversation with you pundits here, and cities account for so much of the world's dirty air. According to a New York Times report, cities make up more than 2/3 of global carbon dioxide emissions. I mean, that shows you that something has to change. A lot of that has to do with public transportation. If you think about how people get around, how efficient it is, and what it is using to move these people around. Is it based on these solid fuels? What is happening and what needs to happen here, Mark?
I think we're seeing a sort of revolution in urban transport that started 20 years ago that's really accelerating now under the combined pressures of the real recognition of the damage that air pollution causes, the climate emergency, but also the impact of the pandemic, which is changing the way that people live in cities. And that what the revolution that's happening is we're redesigning cities for people, not for cars. That kind of model, that post-war model. And you're seeing extraordinary things happening in very short periods of time. In the city of Paris, for example, in France, 650 kilometers of cycle lanes added to that city in the last 2 years. And it's an extraordinary feat. And partly that's because they've been ripping out highways. The highway that ran along the River Seine, taken out to create space for people to walk and to cycle and enjoy the city. The Champs-Élysées now being changed. Same thing being done in the city of Seoul, South Korea, ripping out a 4-lane highway right across the middle of the city. Also a big shift to vehicle electrification, where China is the absolute leader. Shenzhen, 100% of its 10,000 plus bus fleet has been electric for years now, the same for its taxi fleet. But that's now moving right across the world, and Latin America now becoming the leader. The biggest electric bus fleet outside of China is in Bogota, in Colombia. But I guess the final thing, and this particularly speaks to the difficult choices that politicians need to make, is politicians being willing to price out polluting vehicles. So in my city, in London, next week, the mayor will be expanding what is already an ultra low emission zone that bans and charges for the really polluting vehicles to the whole of the inner London. 3 million people live in there. It's a really extraordinary policy. And already the policies that have been put in place have reduced by 94% the numbers of people living in areas that exceeded the previous World Health Organization standards that, of course, have just quite rightly changed. And now they'll need to step up again.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and Donnie, were you about to say something? If so, go ahead, and I'll.
Yeah, I was just going to say I 100% agree with you, but I would say that you can't address this air pollution issue without looking at household air pollution too. 15% of ambient air pollution in the world comes from household air pollution. And in South Asia, for example, we're looking at over a third. That is substantial. So when we talk about this issue and what we're doing in cities, we need to bring people along so that they're cooking over clean fuels and with stoves as well when we're looking at those policies in cities, because if not, we're still going to be with that ambient air pollution issue. So I think that needs to be part of the solution as we talk about what we're doing in cities, for sure.
And so here's the thing, Heather, were you going to say something? If so, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, we have to consider it's a global problem too. We can fix it in cities. There's a lot coming out. But what happens in the rural area also comes into the cities, and it causes this mix. So no one can escape. We all are exposed. We're all at basically at the mercy of air pollution, no matter where you live and what areas. And people often think of it as just a city problem, but in many rural areas, it is actually a very significant problem as well, because you have these very polluting vehicles, but you also have massive household air pollution. In some states of India, 50% of household air pollution, 50% of ambient air pollution is caused by household air pollution leaking outdoors. So it's definitely a problem. And I wanted to also bring up a thing about the equity and this thing. And it is, although many people as individuals, we have choices, many cases the individuals don't have choices. They don't have the fuels and the clean technologies available to them. And if we want to make things change, we have to make sure that everybody, the lowest income households can achieve and reach these cleaner energy technologies. It's going to improve their lives. It's going to improve the lives of everyone around this world. If we can create this equity, we shouldn't, there's a large inequity regarding air pollution exposure, and we can't be blaming it fully on the individual. We really need to be calling our policymakers across all countries to make an impact on the health of all the populations, not just in cities and other places.
And what gets me about this is that the urgency you're all speaking with, I don't think people are getting. And I'm trying to get to what we need to do to get people to feel that urgency. Ebony, you were about to say something before I ask the next question.
No, I was going to say that what Heather said is true. We have to enact policies that don't leave communities and workers behind. We have to enact equitable policies that take care of our communities and take care of our workers. And really, the money is already in the government, not just the US government, but governments worldwide. We see over and over that governments are giving money to oil and gas companies to perpetuate harm, when really that money should be going back into communities and investing in them and ensuring that they have clean energy, whether that's internal, indoor energy or external energy. We have the money. We just need government officials who are held accountable and have the courage to make the change.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's dead right. We have a problem of air pollution as a matter of policy choice, because successive governments all around the world have subsidized the fossil fuel industry and ignored the health consequences for the majority of people. But equally, it's policy choices now that can completely reverse that. And when you see, for my constituency, city governments investing in public transport, in cycling and walking, that is investing in mobility that everybody can benefit from, but particularly the most vulnerable, the least well off. When you invest in new roads and support the car, it's the wealthiest that benefit most.
And that's going to pay for itself too. If we can invest in these things, the benefits just in health. I mean, air pollution, the World Bank estimated, I think it was in 2013, it was what, $3.5 trillion just in the healthcare costs due to air pollution. Then there's about $143 billion in lost labor. So just in of itself, by tackling air pollution, a lot of these interventions can cover the costs themselves, just from the savings we get in healthcare costs and productivity and savings. So,
Stephanie, could I jump in?
Actually, Michael, I was coming to you because here's the thing that I want to bring up, right? So you have ProPublica reporter Abram Luscard. He tweeted this whole thread about the cost of doing nothing about climate change. And he said that it could cost the US more than $840 billion a year. And think about it, that doesn't even take into account the moral cost of not doing anything, which brings me to the point that why aren't businesses doing more about this? Why aren't they really putting their money behind this to make changes? Is it because it's actually just not beneficial to their bottom line? Michael, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and narrow this just a touch. I hope not too much. this is, I think, a point Ebony was making, and Mark and Heather, and I'm going to make it a slightly different way. I think what's missing, and this is part of why we created the Air Quality Life Index, is, and it sounds super wonky and super boring, but cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so like brace yourself. Oh God. But what do I mean by that? Currently, and let's be clear, most of the shortened lives and the sick lives really are in Asia and other parts of the developing world. And there are proposals for ideas to reduce air pollution. And what immediately happens is the industry, and this is to your question, Stephanie, it does raise the cost for industry. There's no question. And so industry is just trying to make profits. And I don't think there's anything wrong with just trying to make profits. But it's up to government to set the rules of the road. And so then these proposals come for setting the rules of the road, and the industry says, well, that's going to be very expensive for us. And those are the costs, and probably Senator Markey is used to hearing things like that. What is not being made very clear is the other side of the equation. That is, what are the benefits? And I think a really granular, almost granular approach to considering policy by policy, hey, we're willing to take this many costs in exchange for extending people's lives by, a year or something like that. I think that's where the discussion has to occur. And then you can really make these trade-offs clear. Yes, we are going to make it more expensive for industry to operate, but in exchange, we're getting all these great things. People are leading longer lives, they're leading healthier lives. They can spend time with their children, they can spend time with their family, all the things people want to do. And that case is not being made, I think, in most parts of the world. I think it has been a central part of why the United States has been so successful is through the Clean Air Act. There always has to be cost-benefit analyses, and it has been able to guide policy towards cases where the benefits exceed the cost. And I just think that the capacity for that needs to be built up around the world. It doesn't really exist right now in many places.
And so to that point, Senator Markey, I want to bring you back in here because The Atlantic had some reporting about some big businesses, including the likes of Apple and Walmart and Nike, surreptitiously bankrolling an effort to kill the climate bill. And it would seem, based on some of what else they put out there, that it almost seems like they're speaking out both sides of their mouth. And I wanted to get your take on what you see and how you see this, Senator Markey.
Well, there's only been one comprehensive climate bill to ever pass either the House or the Senate, and it was my bill with Henry Waxman in 2009 that actually passed the House by a vote of 219 to 212, but then died in the Senate. And that was 2009, and that was an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. When experts went back and looked at it, they found that $700 million was spent by opponents of that bill, the largest single amount of money ever spent to defeat any bill in the history of Congress. So on the one hand, I'm kind of proud of that a bill got passed in the House that had the most lobbying money ever against it, but it did die in the Senate. So that's why I actually went to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the beginning of 2019 to say that we should introduce the Green New Deal so that we would create a political movement that would just change the whole discussion in our country. Because it's no surprise that hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent to defeat this effort that we have right now in the Congress in the reconciliation bill to have dramatic increases in funding for climate solutions. And so we knew that would be the case. The difference this time is there's a big change in the intensity of political support from the grassroots across our country, especially young people. And that was my intent in introducing the Green New Deal. So yeah, we know we're in a fight. We know that hypocrisy on stilts is a big part of fighting big companies on this issue. They say they believe in the science, but then they act totally differently. So it's a historic battle. We're at the crossroads. We have to get something done so that the president has credibility in Glasgow and the rest of the world will now have to put on the table their own bold plans to deal with this issue. Otherwise, without the United States as a leader, the rest of the world will continue to be laggards, and the people in their countries, whether it be China, India, countries all across the world, will suffer because of the lack of a transition to a clean energy future.
And you hear what Senator Markey just said. Heather, back to you, because he brought up that idea of 20 countries, being responsible for 80% of the emissions, and we're supposed to reach net zero by 2050, as you heard him say. Is this doable? Or do we have enough people on the field playing this game with us to make things better, to make that goal?
I think that it's hard for me to determine yes or no, but I definitely think we have the evidence, and we need to be gathering more and more support. I think the more that we all can speak, that's why we're really trying to gather the support of the health sector to be super advocates. I mean, who do you trust more? I mean, I go to my doctor and they tell me that air pollution is a risk for my health. I trust them. I believe that what they're telling me is true. Then me as a population, we can speak to our policymakers, and we across the world need to be pulling together forces, because although they're big polluting countries, there's also very small polluting countries where those populations are also suffering. So in any country, although there's big polluters, there's pollution happening everywhere. We need to make sure that all those populations are being addressed, and they all need to understand, and we all have a part to play.
Heather,
go ahead, Donnie.
I would argue, though, that the cost of inaction is too great. We're seeing that this lack of reliance on clean energy is costing trillions of dollars a year, trillions of dollars. And by, over $1,000 per person that lacks access. And so the inversion and the investment that needs to go into it to bring these people up to have access, to have clean energy, to reduce the air pollution and mitigate against climate change is nothing. As Michael said, the cost benefit is really important. And so I think that is really, with the healthcare costs alone for lack of clean energy in low and middle income countries is $1.4 trillion a year estimated, the healthcare costs of this. And so we need to look at all of those things, like Michael says, and recognize that the investment is needed. It's cheaper to invest in this than the long-term outcome of not doing anything and continuing to have healthcare, lost productivity, environmental degradation, and climate change are all really expensive, very expensive. And so we need to support our other countries, low and middle income countries, to actually meet their goals, to achieve this energy access goals that they have and their climate commitments.
Dr. Bernstein, because I was actually going to come to you about this very question, about the idea that we need people to sign on to the urgency that we are discussing here. Can you give us your thoughts about that topic?
Yeah, I think, Stephanie, it's so easy to get lost in the enormity of it, as many have alluded to. And I think our challenge of the moment, and why, frankly, this conversation is so important to have right now, is we need to bring the issue down to size. We need to make it personal. We need to make it actionable and urgent. And I think it's not just my opinion. In fact, there are many scientific studies that underscore this. When we connect climate change to health, it makes it personal, actionable, urgent. And the best pathway to do that, we found, is through air pollution, whether it's indoor pollution or outdoor air pollution. And it's not talking about, at least to the people in the communities around the world that are bearing the brunt of the air pollution, about the political entanglements, which are real. But we have to start with, we have many mothers and fathers on this panel. I have dealt with those as a pediatrician in our hospital in Boston. And I can assure you that for all of us who are deeply concerned about climate change, if my child is in the emergency department suffocating because of air pollution, and I say to that parent who's deeply concerned with climate change, would you want to stop the air pollution that is causing your child suffocating for the purposes of stopping them suffocating today or giving them a livable planet for their future? The choice is pretty clear. And so we can talk about fossil fuels as the joint source of the suffering of the moment and the potential to alleviate that suffering in ways that make decarbonization, the actions we need on climate change, personal, actionable, urgent. And there's really good evidence that this is possible. Not far from where Michael Greenstone is sitting right now at my alma mater, U of C, there have been as one of many communities that's been adversely affected to the issues of equity by air pollution from fossil fuels, researchers showed that as coal plants shut down, the mostly Black and brown children on the south side of Chicago's lungs worked better. They were showing up in the emergency department less often. Here's another piece of urgency. Colleagues of mine at the Chan School showed very clearly that if you have been forced to live in a community with even slightly higher levels of particulate air pollution over many years, your risks of dropping dead from COVID go up dramatically. So there are direct connections between air pollution and risks of dying from COVID. And oh, by the way, when COVID wasn't here, pneumonia is the leading cause of death in children under 5. The children that live in the homes that Donnie was talking about, they're dying from pneumonia because they're breathing air pollution. And lastly, I want to make clear that my kind, the medical providers, particularly the nurses I should put first, doctors like me, pharmacists, are the most trusted messengers in the United States in particular and in many other countries to communicate these things, which is exactly why at Harvard Chan we started a program called Climate MD, which is specifically intended to make sure that our healthcare providers understand these issues and can communicate clearly about them so we can make the issue personal, actionable, and urgent.
And to that point, one of the things that I think Michael brought up earlier was China, and how for the 2008 Olympics, they made great progress on cleaning up their air. You take a look at during the beginning of the pandemic when everything shut down and people were seeing their environment in ways they had not seen it before. People thought maybe that would stick and this would be a point of change and that things would get better. But when you look at China, an estimated 1 million deaths there every year due to poor air quality. Do you think, Dr. Bernstein, that China is doing enough right now to battle climate change since they are seen as one of the largest polluters, air polluters in the world?
Sure. A couple key points there, Stephanie. First of all, China has been very aggressive in many ways on green energy and, as Michael Greenstone alluded to, reducing our pollution. And to my point earlier, this transition started when Gina McCarthy led an effort to get an air quality monitor put on the US Embassy in Beijing that showed that there was an unbelievable amount of death and disability happening, which the government could no longer ignore. So China's climate actions were not for climate. They were to reduce air pollution. To Michael Greenstone's earlier point, the current crisis that people can get their heads around is the air pollution. The second point, and this is to what Senator Markey talks about all the time. I don't have a crystal ball to see what China's energy future is, but what I know in my bones is that there is tremendous pressure right now to clean up air and reduce carbon pollution around the world. And wherever that technology gets developed in the world is going to be the economic powerhouse for this century. And the last point I'll make, and this is critical for equity in this question about China, do you know which country drives the most amount of air pollution in China? It's us. China's air pollution is being produced to send goods to Europe and the United States. So to Senator Markey's earlier point, we have at least an ethical responsibility, but also arguably a strong economic incentive to address this issue. So at the end of the day, we need to decarbonize, and we particularly in this moment need to get rid of air pollution. Our corporate practice, our policies in the United States can have a tremendous influence on that. And clearly we have a lot to gain across the board.
And so Senator Markey, let me just bring you back in here because earlier this year, you said the future of civilization depends on what we do in the next 2 years regarding the climate crisis. And since we are saying here that we need to get everyday people to understand, what would you like to see happen to get people here in the United States, around the world, on board, understanding that air pollution needs to be tackled right now?
Well, the polling says that the American people are on board. Independent voters have now joined with Democrats. In fact, there's a very substantial number of Republicans as well, especially young Republicans who now accept the science. The problem is, as we spoke about earlier, it's the power which the fossil fuel industry has and other industries in blocking real progress. So the science is clear. The public now accepts it. And now the question is, do we have the political courage to be able to get it done? And the moment of truth has arrived, and we have to do something quite dramatic in the House and Senate, put it on Joe Biden's desk, and then he can speak to the world with credibility on these issues. You don't have to tell the Chinese people that they have an air pollution problem. They're protesting about it. Same thing is true in India. It's happening all across the planet. People understand the impact that dirty air has upon their families. The question is, will the United States be the leader And if we're not, then unfortunately, the leaders in those countries will continue with the status quo ante. And in China right now, they have an energy crisis, and they're talking about producing even more coal in terms of the production of electricity in their country. This whole cycle doesn't stop until we have a clean energy revolution, until we lower the costs, we demand that the rest of the world join us. So this is the time, this is the place, we're at the moment, the public all issues go through three phases: political education, political activation, political implementation. The political education on pollution is done. We know it's real, and we know that ordinary families are most adversely affected, especially Black, brown, immigrant, and the poorest in the world. And now it's just time for us to act. And it's going to be a close vote in the House and Senate, but we have to get it done.
Yeah, Senator Markey, you kind of teed this up perfectly, because I want to go to Ebony, because you do have a personal story related to just what Senator Markey was saying. Do you care to share just briefly, because I know we're coming up against the clock, what your family experienced?
Sure, and it goes back to what Dr. Bernstein and Heather said. We trust our healthcare providers. And as a single Black mom, I was told that my 5-year-old son was developing asthma, and I thought it was due to hereditary issues. And she said, "No, where do you live?" And I said, "I live on a highway," quite frankly. And we had to recognize that the pollution that my child was breathing in every day impacted his health. And as a mom, I knew that I needed to make change. So as Senator Markey said, we have 70% of Americans for the first time that agree that climate crisis, air pollution is an issue and are ready and mobilized to make change. We now need to hold our government officials accountable and make sure that they're doing what they need to do so that we can stand where science and justice demands right now.
I'm curious to hear from each of you as we start to wrap up here. And I know this is generally something people say you can't individually make a change, that you got to come together and do something. But because I've learned so much researching all of you and all of the research that you've done, and what I've learned here in this conversation, what I want to hear from you is how individuals can take what they've learned here about air pollution, know how deadly it is, and what they can start doing to make a change in their community, in their state, in their country, whatever it may be. And Donnie, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us one thing that you would like to see people do?
Well, I think here in the United States, we're at a place where we can start cooking with induction cookers, switching away from gas here in the US. I'm not recommending that for low-income countries where that is a transition fuel, but here, I think that's one thing that we can do in the United States for sure.
And let me take it and go to Europe. Mark, go ahead and tell me what you would have people do.
Well, I think we just need more expression of people power. I can't think of anything that's made more difference to politicians having the backbone to take the climate crisis seriously than young people on the streets, the Fridays for Future movement. And I think Senator Markey is exactly right. The vast majority of people get air pollution, get climate change and want action. The trouble is that the small minority that have enriched themselves through fossil fuel pollution still exert far more pressure on governments around the world. And the only way that's going to change is that if people go from passively supporting radical action on climate and air pollution to really standing up and putting the pressure on their politicians.
And Heather, what would you add?
I don't even know how to add more. I think that's exactly right. We need to give the voice to the people. We've been working on trying to campaigning and giving them the voice to speak to their senators, speak to their politicians. We do vote, and voting is pretty common across the world. And so we have that power, and we as the citizens need to make the change. And we also are trying to get our health sector at WHO to really be advocates as well, and really be teaching the community and teaching our politicians that what it is the air pollution is doing to their health as the way, because nobody's going to argue with a health argument.
Well, and speaking of health argument, why don't we go to Dr. Bernstein? Dr. Bernstein, what would you add?
Well, it is hard to add. I mean, I think to me, what it comes down to is remembering that health is not exchangeable. You know, the story of Ebony's child and so many other parents I've dealt with is that we forget that health is not the same as other goods in our society. When we exact a toll on our health, and especially in an unjust way, those are things that we can't buy back. There's no economic good we can replace it with. And I think the more the parents and children of this world, and particularly to the youth climate movement, we get that embedded into our minds, it's going to be very hard for us to act in ways that don't lead us to a more just and healthy world.
And to our economist, Michael, what would you add?
I'm going to just take the perspective of today's developing countries, where honestly the climate's future is going to be determined. I think there's an enormous problem that there is the kind of movement that led to the EPA and the Clean Air Act, where people had, in the US, where people had information about what air pollution was doing to them. That does not exist in too many places in the world. It does not exist in India. It does not exist in Bangladesh. It does not exist in Pakistan. It has begun to exist in China and has led to really remarkable improvements there. And so I think it's absolutely code red to get people in the places that are suffering from high levels of air pollution to understand the consequences and advocate for policies that would change that. And as a corollary, it will produce climate co-benefits along the way, getting rid of air pollution. So
that's true. Ebony, what's one thing that you would like to see people start doing to make a difference here?
Well, as Senator Markey said, we have an opportunity right now. President Biden's agenda called for healthcare reform, economic recovery, racial injustice, addressing that, and then also the climate crisis. And we deserve to live in a world that's far beyond fossil fuels. I believe in people power. I believe that we all have power. I believe that we all need to come together and hold our government officials accountable. It is possible. They do listen. Like you said, when we get out in the streets and we show up, we cannot be turned away. And that is what I would encourage everyone to do. Find your voice in this moment. We can make a change if we all come together.
Yeah, get everyone on board. And Senator Markey, I give the last word to you on the idea of what you would have, since this has been so much of your life work, what would you have people do to make change about air pollution?
Well, I was the chair of the Climate Committee in Congress from 2007 to 2010. I had 100 hearings on all of these issues. It's a complete documentation of the environmental health and environmental injustice issues. It's all there. So this is not new, what we're talking about. It's only further documented in terms of what the impacts are. And so we don't have a science problem. That's settled. We don't have a technology problem. Those technologies are there, ready to be deployed. We have a political problem. That's what's been blocking the solutions being put in place. And Congress is a stimulus response institution. There's nothing more stimulating than hundreds of thousands of millions of people contacting their members over the next month. That's what we need. We need political action. And then we will be able to deploy the technologies that deal with the science problems that have been absolutely correctly identified. So this is the moment. We might have to wait another 10 years for a moment like this. So everyone has to be on board, doing their work, being political for the next month in order to get the solutions, which we know have to be put in place.
That have to be done. And the idea of climate change, I spend a lot of time covering climate change at CNN, of covering the droughts and wildfires and all those things that we travel to so that people can see what is happening out there. We know the dangers of climate change. We know that this is a crisis. Actually, we should probably call it a climate crisis at this point, and that it's critical to our health, to our well-being, to that of our children, the next generation, and as well as our national security. And I want you to take a listen to what economist Lawrence Summers had to say on the topic.
This is a crucial moment in global economic history. We've got challenges of inflation, of debt, of unemployment, of globalization. But I believe the most profound of these challenges, the one that historians will judge our generation on, the challenge of climate, the challenge of pandemic disease. After thousands of years when primary challenges to security involved other peoples with weapons, today it is what we as a common humanity do that is perhaps most important for the security of my children and the security of the grandchildren, I hope, to have. Will we meet that challenge? It is the question of our times.
Will we meet that challenge? The question of our times. I really hope that people got so much from this as I have. I've learned so much. It feels like another thing that I need to take on to report about, because I don't think people understand just how deadly air pollution is. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here to share all of their knowledge with us. I'm just going to go from the way I see you right now: Michael Greenstone, Dr. Ari Bernstein, Donnie Alexander, and also Ebony Twilley Martin and Mark Watts, Heather Adair Rohani, and also Senator Ed Markey. Thank you so much for being here. I want to also thank Dean Williams for inviting me to be here as well, and the Harvard School of Public Health. This was really a fantastic conversation, and I do hope that people have learned something, and I hope that everyone moves forward and is well. Take care.